Welcome, everyone. My name is Paige Rivard. I'm the CEO of PWSA and mom to Jake, age 12, living with PWS. And welcome back to those of you who joined us for the first behavior presentation earlier. We had Stacy Ward, our Director of Family Support, and she discussed the ABCs of behavior. And I'm happy to introduce to you today our second speaker, Patrice Carroll. Patrice will be presenting Challenging Behaviors, Prevention is Key. And many of you, I think, know Patrice. She is the Director of PWS Services at Latham Centers in Massachusetts. Patrice received her MSW from Simon's College in Boston in 2008 and is also a member of the International Prader-Willi Syndrome Organization, Professional Providers and Caregivers Advisory Board, and has over 22 years of experience working with children and adults with PWS. Patrice has also co-authored a book, Living Healthy with Prader-Willi Syndrome, and she's currently working towards her doctorate degree with an emphasis on trauma in families living with PWS. So Patrice is well accomplished in the PWS world, and we're very grateful to have her here today with us, sharing her wisdom and knowledge on PWS. So Patrice, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you get started.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paige.
Looks like we might still be having the same issue on the slideshow where we're seeing the left-hand side. We've tried many different things, but I think here we'll try one more. We'll try one other thing, and if that doesn't work, we'll just go with what we have.
Yep, that works for me.
There we go.
There we go. Perfect. Thanks, Stacey.
Right.
And we can go to the first slide. Great, thank you. So we're going to talk about what do we do to help from the challenging behaviors to start in the first place. So we want to remember a few things before we even start. So these are just 5 reminders. What's your end game? So you want to stay out of the power struggle of making sure that things go the way that you want them to go. So if you want somebody to take a shower and you're upset that they flipped you off and slammed the door and then went and took a shower, they took a shower and that's the end game. You want people who are calm and secure and learning, not soldiers. It's not going to always go the way that you want it to go. The end game is whatever that goal that you have, and don't get stuck in the things that happen in between. If the person took a shower and that was the goal, the person took a shower and that's great. Go on from there. You need to understand the brain differences. Thought process, motivation, processing speed are all different, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. You want to let it go. It's not personal, and learning will not happen when emotions are high from you or the person that you're working with. So you need to be able to step back and let it go. You want to teach skills early and often, and you need to take a break. This is very hard work. You need to remember, you are their impulse control. You are their safety. You are their motivation. You are their timekeeper. And you want to get away from things like, they know better than to do that. That might be true. They may know better than to do that, but they're not able to act better without your support. And it's up to us to practice and engage and supervise in a mindful way to ensure optimal success. So we can go on to the next slide. We want to remember, and you have heard me say this time and time again, the list of what's amazing about people with PWS is so much longer than the list of challenges. So we want to make sure they're always kind of resetting back to what they're really good at. We know that they're rule followers. We know that to some extent they can use reason, not when they're upset, but when they're at baseline. They thrive on praise, and the reverse is true as well. So they will act the way that you treat them. You get what you give. If you are positive and they know that you like them and you're working with their strengths, you are going to get a much calmer, happier person that's willing to work towards the things that they need to work towards. But if you're coming at them, if you're frustrated, if You're consequence based. If you're saying things like, if you keep doing that, you're going to lose A, B, and C, you're done. They'll more likely follow a plan if they help create it, and that's true for anybody. So again, we're not looking to create soldiers. We are looking to help guide, coach people into having a better quality of life. They'll reset themselves after an incident if you let them. If there's an incident, they almost always fall asleep afterwards. Let them sleep. And there's two schools of thoughts as to whether or not you should then go back immediately after that and talk about what happened and things they could do better. And another school of thought, which is where I stay, is just move on and teach the skills when there's not an incident, teach the skills when they're at baseline, teach them every day, teach them often, start really young. That's what I believe, more than going to kind of rehash what happened and go over the incident that same day. That doesn't, I haven't seen anything good come from that. They care about others deeply, but they may not know that they hurt or offended someone. And we're going to talk about theory of mind in a little bit. So they are compassionate, they are empathic, they do care, but they don't always know when they've hurt somebody. So we can go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so here are some of the barriers that get in the way. Executive functioning disorder and sensory processing disorder, we're going to talk about in a second. There's a lack of and an inconsistent impulse control. And this is kind of where people get stuck. And this is where, when you're looking at the need for job coaching and if people can be safe in the community. So oftentimes, and we know it's a spectrum, but oftentimes you have individuals who can tell you how to be safe at home, how to be safe in the community. They can tell you how to cross the street. They can tell you what to do if there's a fire in their apartment. But there's an inconsistency to whether or not they're able to act on that 100% of the time. And we know this same is true for being safe around food. The lack of an inconsistent impulse control gets in the way of them being able to really reach their potential. So, and that's where we come in as their safety net, as their impulse control. We're there to coach, to watch, to supervise, and to make sure that that quality of life can be reached with support. Very high reward drive. So whether or not they'll learn from past mistakes is pretty unlikely, because that high reward drive is going to kick in, and regardless of a past consequence, they're probably going to act on that. They have slow processing speed. Slow processing speed comes along with executive functioning disorder, which we'll talk about in a minute. But as an example, someone with slow processing speed only hears the last thing that you said. So if you say to somebody, if you're getting ready for an outing, something they've worked for, something they've earned, and you say to them, they come to you and they say, I can't find my shoes. And you say to them, oh, I know where your shoes are. They're under your bed. Go get your shoes on, put them on, come back out here. We're leaving in 5 minutes. Now you're trying to be really helpful. You're trying to be supportive. You're telling them where their shoes are. They came to you and said, I can't find my shoes. And what you said to them, what they heard was, we're leaving in 5 minutes. So that outing died. That's done. It's not going to happen because of the way that you communicated. Now you're trying to be helpful, but you weren't, because you have to understand that when you have slow processing speed, all that stuff you said in the middle wasn't even heard. They heard the last thing that you said, and it's a different way to communicate. We're used to being conversational. That's how we talk. That's how we are. But when you're working with somebody with PWS, with executive functioning disorder, you need to remember that the only thing that they're hearing is the last thing that you said. So keep it simple. I can't find my shoes. Either let's go find your shoes together. I know where they are. Or they're under your bed. Go get your shoes on. Once they've gotten their shoes on, you say, all right, come on out here. Okay, we're leaving in 5 minutes. It's a different way to talk, but it's effective, and you won't have that miscommunication that we often fall into. And of course, they're highly anxious at baseline. So anything that adds to that anxiety is where the behaviors are going to come in. And Stacy, we can go on to the next. All right, so executive functioning disorder, it's really important to understand this. People with executive functioning disorder have trouble managing their emotions. They have problems starting and organizing tasks. They have trouble focusing. They can't multitask. They have a hard time managing their time. There's an inability to learn from past consequences. They have a hard time processing new information. The ability to manage tasks and manage behaviors is impaired. So if you think about the person in your life with PWS, my guess is that every one of those things, every one of those boxes was checked off. It is very difficult for the person living with executive functioning disorder to be able to manage a task from beginning to end. They can't compartmentalize all the things that need to go in between. So if you say to somebody, go take some time in your room, take 15 minutes in your room to cool off, or, I'm busy trying to get something done, I need you to go to your room for a few minutes. They're not going to be able to know what to do. So they may have puzzles and coloring books and games and all sorts of things in their room, but they're not going to be able to start that task on their own. You have to say, you're going to go into your room and you're going to color for 15 minutes. Here's a coloring book, here's crayons. You're going to go into your room, you're going to play your video game for 15 minutes in the room. Here's the game, here's the console, whatever they play with, the handheld thing. You have to start them on that task. They'll be able to then do that. Then you're going to have to come back in and help them end it. We use executive functioning disorder all the time. We use it to get ready for work. We use it to plan big events and everything in between. The person with executive functioning disorder has a very, very difficult time planning, adapting, and organizing. Another part of executive functioning disorder, of executive functioning, is to be able to understand what to do if you hit a roadblock. So you need to be able to be flexible. You need to be able to think on your feet. These are things that come very, very hard to people with PWS. So we can go to the next one. So this is another part of executive functioning disorder. And this is something that I suggest, I'm assuming this PowerPoint will get sent out. This is something that you should print out. The person with PWS has a very difficult time differentiating between what's an emergency and what's a small problem, or what's a glitch. So you can actually take this chart and work with them and describe in their words, and using real life scenarios, what would be an emergency? What would be a gigantic problem? What would be a big problem? Because they really don't know. So we assume that when they have these really big reactions to things that we think don't matter, it doesn't matter if we think they matter or not. It matters to the person, and the person doesn't understand the difference between a little problem and a big problem. And that's where we need to come in, again, as coaches, as support staff, as people in their lives that are going to help gear them towards being able to manage some of these really, really big emotions effectively. So take the chart, write down in your own words what fits in each piece, because they truly don't know. And I think that one thing that we do, and we shouldn't, is we assume that they're coming to the table with the same set of skills that we are. So we have the ability to manage difficult problems, to communicate effectively, to know what to do if an emergency comes up, to know what to do if our plans fall through. We can be successful in our jobs and our relationships because we have those tools. They don't. So understand that when you see really big reactions to things, it's because they don't have the skills. Their brains are different than ours. So we need to be that person in their life to help them navigate through these really big feelings and teach the skills. And these things can be learned over time. They take a little while, but they can be learned. And this is one of those charts that's going to help them understand the difference between something that's really little and something that's really big. Thanks, Stace. So sensory processing disorder, you guys have heard me talk about this a million times, but it's really, really important to understand that sensory processing is how your brain processes sensory info. And when you have sensory processing disorder, you're overly sensitive to stimuli that other people are not. So you have a difficulty regulating your response to stimulation. So when you are working with someone with PWS, check the environment, especially If you notice that something that they normally can do very well, they're having a difficult time with, check the lighting, check to see if it's something that they're wearing. And we know that part of going from season to season is the temperature dysregulation, but the other part of it is sensory processing disorder. You spend 3 months wearing shorts, it's going to be really hard to go to pants because you're not used to feeling that fabric. Or you wear a hoodie all winter and all of a sudden you're in a t-shirt, and the air on your skin can be really, really aggravating and anxiety provoking if you have sensory processing disorder. And again, this goes back to, it doesn't matter if it's something that wouldn't bother you. It bothers them and it needs to be addressed. So check the environment, check the lights. Are they flickering? Are the fluorescent lights making noise? It can be any one of those things. And the last thing I'll say about sensory processing disorder is that one of the first things that we develop as children is infants is the vestibular sense, because infants move their heads back and forth all the time. And that's your sense of balance. Babies with PWS are floppy. They don't move their heads back and forth. So they never fully develop that vestibular sense. If you can work with an OT in your life, work with a PT, help design something that they can use to help develop their vestibular sense, swings, juggling, even if it's just with 2 things, walking on a straight line, put tape on the floor and help them walk on the straight line. This is why they don't like to walk on uneven terrain. They're not lazy. It's not that they're not motivated. It's not that they're trying to be competitive. They really feel like they're going to tip over all the time. So if you can work on this vestibular sense, you have a much calmer person who's able to try to explore a little bit more in their physical environment. Okay, so theory of mind. Theory of mind is the ability to understand another person's mental state, their beliefs, their intentions, their feelings. And we use this all the time to predict how other people are going to react, right? So we know that if we say something, the person will react in a certain way. If we do something, this will be the consequence. Theory of mind starts to develop at a very, very young age, usually around 2 or 3. This is the time when you're able to understand that other people have different feelings, different likes, different interests. You take 2 little boys and one of them likes Superman, one of them likes Batman, and that's an understood. And if there's a Batman toy, one little boy will give it to the other little boy. But someone who doesn't develop theory of mind, if they like Superman, then Superman must be the best because I like Superman, so everybody must love Superman, right? So this is where we run into trouble in relationships. This is a skill deficit, and you can teach it through modeling, but it doesn't come naturally to them. So they are seeing the world through however they feel, whatever they like, whatever their beliefs are. And they don't have the understanding that other people have different beliefs. So imagine how hard that is to be in a relationship, to be at a job, to be in school, and not have the ability to see that other people see the world differently than you do. One thing that's really important to understand is that we say things all the time like, how do you think Johnny felt when you took his pencil? Well, the truth is he has no idea how Johnny felt because he doesn't see the world through how Johnny feels. He sees the world through how he feels. So we make assumptions that they're able to do this very basic thing that we do all the time, which is see how someone else may feel, know how someone else may react, and they don't have the ability to do that. Now, over time, you can work on this. You can, it's a lot of self-talk, it's a lot of talking out loud, but you can say things like you're going into a library and their sister loves horses and you see a book about horses and you can say, I bet Sally would love that book because her favorite animal is horses. I know your favorite animal are zebras, but she loves horses, so I bet she would love this. And it sounds ridiculous to say it out loud, but it works. It's effective. And knowing that this isn't something that comes naturally to them can really help when you're trying to teach these skills that they just don't come with. So we need to understand how the brain works. like I said, we are making a lot of assumptions about how they're able to experience the world, how they're able to experience being in a relationship. But the truth is, a neurotypical person has neuroplasticity. Their brain has an ability to change and grow and reorganize. Your brains can rewire to form new habits. People with PWS can't rewire like we can. We're doing a disservice by assuming that they can bounce back and adapt and be flexible when in a way that a neurotypical person can. They don't have the ability to do that. So we don't want to excuse the behavior, and I hear this all the time. We want to explain it, but it's very important that if your child is doing something, if something happened at school, something happened at work, whatever, to say, well, this is because you have PWS, or to let them hear you say that to somebody else. One of the things that I want to stress is that when you have a child who is in school or in a day program or working or whatever, if you have feelings about their teacher, their job coach, the staff, just make sure that that's not something that you're saying out loud in front of them, because it sets up a situation where they will then have negative feelings about their staff or their teacher or whoever they're working with. But it also sets up some longer term issues with them feeling like they can not listen to an authority figure. I've seen a lot of incidents where an individual had an altercation with a policeman or with somebody in authority because they really felt like, I can say whatever I want. My dad, hates my teacher and he calls her all sorts of names. And so I can do that too. And over time, it just establishes a feeling and behavior that authority figures don't matter and that they can kind of say and do whatever they want towards them. So just a piece of advice to make sure that you address things with whoever you're having an issue with, just not in front of your child. And Stace, I'd like to open, I know it's a little bit early, but I know there's so many questions, so I'd kind of like to open it up to questions. And then we can come back to any of this.
That would be great. Stacy and I are going to tag team because I have to go pick up my son off the bus here in a minute, but
sure.
I'll start with a few questions for you. Can we consider really young to be in the 4 to 6 age group?
What's that in relation to?
I'm not sure. This is an anonymous question. So if you want to just put another little bit of information in there for us, we can come back and answer that. Another question is the lack of impulse control a lifelong barrier?
Yes, it is. And it's something that, it's one of the reasons why, and everybody wants as much independence as possible. Everyone wants our kids and our adults to have as much independence as possible. However, we just have to be really aware that you cannot trust that impulse control, and that it's the 100th time that's going to do something that's going to cause a lot of problems. So impulse control is a huge issue, and it's something that it holds them back from jobs, from living independently. But you just can't trust that impulse control 100% of the time.
That is very true. At what age can you test for executive function disorder? Is age 4 in pre-K too soon?
No, you can test for it very, very young. Yeah. So for kindergarten, you can test for executive functioning, because by that age, they should have, as far whatever their developmental level is, by around the developmental age of 4 or 5, you should be able to see a child be able to start, do the middle and finish a project, even if it's something very small. And you'll know around that age if they can't do that. So yeah, you can test for that very young.
And so I'm sorry, Patrice, can you expand on how to go about testing for that?
Yeah, so any school, I've
had a few school districts say they don't do testing for executive functioning and that they need outside assessment.
I haven't heard that. So
I thought it was an odd.
That is odd, because most schools would be able to test for that just using any any sort of staff person that they have that's you know, what's the word I'm thinking of?
Trained.
Qualified to.
Qualified, trained, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So
Thank you.
similar question, Patrice, around sensory processing. Is there a certain age that you can start testing for that, or how do you know when to look for that?
Yeah, so you'll know with sensory processing, you're going to know anytime that you add something to the environment that they're not used to. So a sound, you're going to see it. And this is something that it's one of the reasons why a lot of kids will get diagnosed, and sometimes rightfully so, but they'll be be diagnosed as someone who's on the spectrum, because that's something they absolutely see in the spectrum. No question. You don't always see it in PWS, but it's pretty common. But you're going to see a kid who doesn't like to touch like sand, or certain textures will get them really upset. Clothing, tags in the clothing, new clothing, any sort of light that's flickering, like you're going to notice agitation around things in the environment that you shouldn't see agitation around.
Great. Here's a little bit of clarification from the previous question.
Yeah.
It was in relation if we start intervention at a really young age. So again, wanting to know if we consider really young 4 to 6, and that is in relation to, can we start intervention at a really young age?
Yeah, you absolutely can. So anything that you can do to teach coping skills, to teach self-calming techniques, that's a big one. Anything that you can do, and there's all sorts of there's videos on YouTube, there's stuff on how to teach kids how to do deep breathing and yoga and mindfulness. The resources are endless, and 4, 5, 6 years old, there's no reason not to start that.
We do a lot of deep breathing. Take some deep breaths.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting about that is that oftentimes it's hard for them to take a really good deep breath because they have such poor muscle tone, but there's games you can play around it. Because when you tell someone to take a deep breath, you say, your shoulders go up, and usually they'll just move their shoulders up and they won't really take the deep breath. But you can do things like take a paper, make a ball out of it and have them blow it across a table. Blowing bubbles is really helpful. The pinwheels are really helpful because it forces them to take that deep breath.
Those are great ideas.
Yeah.
What is a good way to train executive control?
Well, that's something that you can't necessarily train that. So if you need help with executive functioning disorder, that help's probably going to be external. So there isn't a whole lot of progress you're going to make. If someone is struggling with executive functioning, you're going to have to put in external things to help them. Charts, 1, 2, 3, this, that, then the last thing. You're going to have to do that stuff externally. It's not something you can necessarily train.
I know, again, for us, our occupational therapist integrates executive functioning into our OT sessions. So you might, if you don't have that, or you might ask for that too. Would vestibular sensory still be something you would be able to work on with adults ages 40 to 50?
100%. Yeah. The other thing I didn't mention that it's a huge benefit for vestibular processing is horseback riding. So yes, you can absolutely work on it later in life. We actually, initially we had years ago, we designed a playground on campus for vestibular work. And we actually saw a pretty big decline in behaviors after we put that in. And it was just, it's swings, it's that thing that spins around, balance beams, all sorts of stuff. But it was designed for the vestibular sense.
Great. Next question. When an incident occurs, let's say with an outburst with someone, it doesn't seem like it works to rehash when they're calm. I hear, why are you bringing this up? It's over. And then they become upset again.
Yeah. So I actually agree with that. I haven't seen the benefit in kind of going back and looking at, you could have done this differently, or why did you get upset? What I find is oftentimes they don't even remember why they got upset. The incident is out of their control. So I think this is something that I want people to understand, that this isn't manipulative, it's not non-compliance, it's truly their brains cannot manage the level of anxiety and stimulation, and they react. So to go back and say, what could you have done differently? The real question is to go back and ask yourself, what could I have done differently to prevent this? Not ask the individual what they could have done differently, because really something in the environment, whether it be another person, the environment itself, whatever situation it was, caused them to get so anxious that they had a behavioral incident through no fault of their own. And I think that's something that's really the reason I don't think it makes sense to go back and go over what happened. I think you're better off asking yourself what happened, what got in the way, what caused this, make sure that doesn't happen again. And then teach the skills when they're at baseline, not even about the incident, but if you saw that they got really anxious and had an aggressive episode, well, then when they're at baseline, you can start teaching them skills, how to identify when they're starting to get upset and what things they can do when they're feeling really out of control. But going back over it, I find it just gets them upset all over again because they really don't know the answer.
Yeah. I just wanted to remind everybody, this is being recorded. It will be posted to our YouTube channel, our website. A link will be sent to everybody who registered. So there's multiple ways you will get this content afterwards. And then thank you, Erin, for your suggestion. A neuropsychologist would be the best person to test and screen for executive function.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. What's the percentage of kids with PWS that have executive functioning disorder and sensory processing disorder? Do you know?
I don't, but it's very high. So I don't know anyone who doesn't. And I know a lot of kids and adults. So I can't put a number on it, but I'd say it's pretty close to 100. Yeah.
I love this question. My son is 20. Can we ever in the future see the possibility of leaving him home alone for up to 3 hours in the event we cannot find a sitter?
So, like I said, it's a spectrum. I know a lot of families who set their house up in a way that they're able to leave their child alone for a few hours. I know a lot of families who can't. So it really depends on whether or not where he falls on that spectrum. I know plenty of families who do it. I know plenty of families who can't.
Yep. Sensory processing disorder is controversial in the OT world.
Mm-hmm.
Need to find an OT who has expertise in this area. So,
yes, definitely. Yes, that is definitely true.
New mom, welcome, new mom. Next one, hi Barb. Comment. I'm thinking vestibular therapy might help prevent falls as our adults who are aging. I've seen my son have more insecurities when walking on certain surfaces at night. Thanks. I'm going to look into this. He's 30.
Yes, absolutely. So falls are a big deal for a couple of reasons. One is they have such a high pain threshold, and they also have like a slow inflammatory process. So I've known people who have broken ribs, who have fractured their ankle, and normally we'd be like in a ball screaming in the corner because we'd be in so much pain, but we'd also start to swell, and they don't. So falls are a really, really big deal because they can get really hurt and you don't know it. But when you work on the vestibular sense, they do feel more secure moving around. A lot of times, like if they drop something, they won't bend over to pick it up. And people think that they're just like being lazy. It's not lazy. They feel like they're going to fall over. So they don't like to bend down.
And in some cases they do. We've seen it.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Schools typically want students to review incidents. What other choices could you have made as soon as they calm down after the incident?
Yeah.
You need to understand that it can make things worse.
Yeah. I would get that in the IEP to not do that because it really does make it worse. And there's no benefit to the student. There's benefit to the adults because they want to go over it. I think it's like the parent in us, like there should be a consequence because he broke my pencil or whatever. It doesn't work. It doesn't help and usually just makes it worse. So it's kind of like, do you want to be right or do you want peace? Like, what do you want? You have to be right about this. It's not going to help them.
Right. I always say to a teacher, is it reinforcing your behavior or theirs?
Right.
Is apologizing for a dispute with a sibling considered rehashing?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's fine if it's not like really forced, like unless you apologize, you're not getting your video game tonight. Like if they're, I think it makes sense to explain, and this goes back to theory of mind. Like when you did that, it really hurt his feelings. It made you feel like you didn't like him. We want to work on being a better brother. And part of that is saying you're sorry when you do something to hurt somebody. And that's totally fine. Yeah.
Yes, Barb, when I send out the link with the recording, I will include a PDF version of Patrice's slides.
Good,
So
good.
we'll have all of those charts.
Good.
Try strategies after outburst, but when in the moment, can't stop and think about to apply those strategies. So
say that one more time.
I think what Nancy is suggesting is trying strategies after you've had an outburst, so people are calm, and trying new strategies then. But in
Yes.
it's not the time.
And it's not going to work. It's when they're really upset, they're in their amygdala, they're in their reptilian brain. There is no reasoning, there's no talking, there's no threatening, promising, nothing. They're not. They're in their fight, flight, freeze mode. And until you get them to their frontal lobe, to the front of their brain, there is no talking to them at all. It's not going to work.
Yeah. How can you validate your child's feelings when they're getting upset without getting sucked into a repetitive question vortex?
Yeah. So I think it's perfectly fine to say, I see you're getting upset. I know you're getting upset, and you probably know why. And I think it's fine to name it. When the questions start, you probably know what the questions are going to be. I would have them written down. If they're a pre-reader, I would have story blocks so they see the pictures of it. The question asking will never stop unless you stop it. So you have to be that external control. You have to be the one to say asked and answered. You can ask me 3 times, answer exactly the same way each time, and then it's done. And they will stop eventually if you stop responding. But sometimes what happens is we reinforce these behaviors without even realizing it. So if they ask 3 times and you say, that's it, not answering, and then 10 more times you say, okay, fine, I told you already, it's this, you've just reinforced that behavior. So you have to stick to it. I love the idea of writing it down. Buy a cheap laminator because they'll rip it up. So laminate it, hand it to them, that's it. And really you have to stick to it though, because if you cave, it just starts the whole thing all over again.
The individuals I support are in residential care. Should I request an OT or a PT for them? They're between 40 and 50 years old.
OT, I think OT, right? Stacey,
I agree. Yes, what I found in residential was hard to find an outpatient OT who really was supportive of the sensory diet and implementing those things.
Yeah.
Can you list the types of therapists to seek out for types of therapeutic care, such as vestibular therapy using social stories for adults? Who would you go to?
So any of the vestibular stuff would always be an OT. Social stories can be any therapist. Any therapist in the world knows how to do a social story. In fact, you could do them yourself. They're super easy. Again, watch a YouTube video. Like, social stories are amazing, really easy to write, and you can write them for every situation. If they're going to a new doctor, if they're starting a new job, social stories are very simple, easy to write. If you're not comfortable doing it, any therapist that they see will be able to write a really good social story. But then you should get used to doing it yourself. Even parents, like, just get used to writing them because they're very easy, very effective.
Yes, and for those of you who may not know, we have some sample social stories in the source part of our website. Some have like graphics and pictures that we put in, and then we also have link ones for you to customize yourself so that you can use them. But that's
awesome. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I think the social stories, people very often think they're only effective with children, and that's
Nope. Use for everybody.
Yeah. So Nancy clarified. So what she's saying is, after an outburst, the strategies don't work, like deep breathing and distractions.
That's right. Right.
Yeah.
So after the incident, I would just give them space.
Mhm.
And then even the next day, like when they're back to baseline, that's when you start working on the strategies. But around an incident, I would just, I mean, honestly, there really isn't anything you can do except let it happen. Let it end, let them sleep, and then get on with it when they're
Mhm.
awake and get on to the next thing.
So Mary says, this is amazing for me to hear. I have a 33-year-old PWS daughter who's very sweet. I feel like I'm learning so much more today. Thank you.
Good, good.
Great to hear. Someone is saying that PT for assessment prior to an exercise regimen that
Yeah.
may be new, given the many vestibular issues that they have.
Yes, yes, definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
Barb, there's also PTs who specialize in vestibular therapy.
Hmm. Good.
Used one. That's good to know. I
That
don't
is
hear
good to know.
PTs, so that's excellent.
They might be easier to find too.
Yes. Okay, so right now there's no other questions, but that leads me to believe that people are typing. They're
Yeah.
pretty rapidly. So please, we have a
So
few
let me
minutes.
just add, Stace, because you asked me about this before we started. Let's just talk about skin picking for a second. So I wish I could sit here and say, this is why they do it and this is what you do, but the truth is we really don't know. Best thing that I've heard so far is that they have a dulled and delayed endorphin release. So we release endorphins all day long when we eat, when we sleep, when we exercise, all day. They don't. They release endorphins when they experience pain. They have a very high pain tolerance, so they need to do some pretty serious picking before they get that endorphin release, similar to someone with cutting behavior. So the best thing that I found so far is barrier supervision. So if you can find a barrier, you're halfway there because that's going to get it healed. And that can be, depends on where they're picking. If they're rectal picking, I would put on like a triathlon suit, overalls, tights, anything like that. For someone with really serious rectal picking behavior that usually happens overnight, mitts when they're sleeping. And if you're in a residential program, you're going to have to go through all sorts of hoops to get that done, but you can get it done.
Yes.
If they're picking on, you know, their arms, you can do this pretty cool tattoo sleeves that they might want to wear. Anything like that. Now, I heard something recently, and I'm not going to remember what it is, but there's a certain kind of gel nail dip something.
Yes.
Apparently, it makes the nails really thick and smooth,
And it's
and they
a lot
can't
harder to
pick.
pick.
Yes. So I read it. It was on someone posted on Facebook.
Mhm.
That they're
Actually, a couple of people here just posted that they found that doing the manicures.
it's
helped.
called something NSA something.
Is it the ANC?
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know
Is it
anything about
that?
manicures, but it's a special dip that it's like the new thing, but it
Mhm.
makes the nails really like thick so they can't pick. So,
Yes.
and if
I
you know,
worked
if you
with a
don't want
young lady.
color, you can get them clear.
Right. I worked with a young lady that we, as an agency, paid for her nails.
Yes,
Part of the behavior intervention plan because it decreased her skin picking so drastically.
so much. Yeah.
Along the skin picking piece, Patrice, I remember you sharing a story many years ago about how sensory input had decreased some
Yes.
individuals. And I know when I do training, I very often share that story.
Yeah. Yeah.
A little bit about kind of the trial and error around that.
Yeah. So, and we've done this a few times. So any sort of sensory stimulation is also going to release endorphins, but you need to do it regularly, often. So we tried it. It was like, you know, like once a day. I didn't do anything, 3 times a day. We had to really play with it to see how often it needed to happen. And it's different for every person. So always around transitions, before the bus comes, when they get back from school, before dinner, you know, before bath, just any time around the transitions, because anxiety has a lot to do with it also. So you want to make sure that during those transition times when we know they're anxious, you're doing that real deep sensory input. So it can be a back massage, it can be the vibrating cushions, putting your feet on one of those vibrating things. We've actually found that was really effective for people who rectal pick while they're on the toilet. So you plug in that, I don't know what they're called, but they vibrate and you put your feet on them.
Yep.
When you do that while they're on the toilet, the rectal picking actually stopped. And that was her biggest time when she did it. So it really depends on when they're doing it, why they're doing it. Because sometimes it's anxiety, sometimes it's boredom, sometimes it's transitions. A lot of times they don't even know they're doing it. It's just a mindless thing that they're just kind of staring off and picking. So it really is, you have to really supervise to figure out when they're doing it. And that's when you put the whatever you're putting in place. It can be even just a distraction. We had other people who pick while on their toilet, but they were picking in their face, and we just gave them a really cheap handheld video game. And that stopped us because there was something to do.
Yep. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
This is a great question for you, given your trauma experience. So we have a boy, age 14, from foster care. We never know how much of his destructive behavior is trauma related or just connected to PWS. Safe to assume that most behaviors are connected to PWS?
Not necessarily. So I've worked with a number of people who have PWS and a trauma history. So it really depends on what they're doing, when they're doing it. One way to tell the difference is that someone with PWS, just PWS, their behaviors are almost never in retaliation, not planned, not out of revenge. So you can be the closest person in the world to them and you're still going to get it if they're upset. Someone with a trauma history may have a reaction to someone in particular and continue to aggress towards them or have a really difficult time around them. So that's kind of how you can tell the difference. A PWS behavior is just kind of boom, out of nowhere. It's messy, it's not planned. You could if you hurt someone with PWS, they're not necessarily going to go after you the next time they see you. It's going to be if they're upset, and it's probably just going to come out of the blue. Like, there it is, they're upset, and then it's over, and they're not going to hold a grudge. Trauma is very, very different. So that's kind of how you can tell the difference there, but it is very difficult. Trauma and PWS is a very, very difficult road, but bless you for doing that, because that child clearly needs to be loved. So thank you for doing that for him.
You mentioned that, you may see an increase when they're around certain people. Would that go also for certain environments?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. So, it really is, what you do is you kind of look back and say, even to start the day, to say, is there anything getting in her way from being her best self today? Like, that's the question that you ask. Is it the environment? Is it the people that are around? Is it, something that's coming up? Like, what is it that's getting in the way of her being her very best self? And fix that, not her.
Thank you. Nancy's saying, if an incident outburst is in public and you can't give them space, try to remove the PWS client, but it's difficult to do. You're stuck in that moment.
Yes.
Any thoughts around that? I think we've all been there.
I wish I could share. I wish I had it to share my screen. We came up with some cards for parents to have in their pocket, that if they had an incident that just says, I don't need help, please don't stare, please walk away. You're adding to it if you stick around. Like, basically, like, stop it, because people in the community, they want to help. Or in the worst case scenarios is people call the police because they think the staff are hurting the individual. So if an incident happens in the community, someone's going to probably call the police. Now, most times that's actually probably going to help, because they see the police and go, okay, I'm fine. In other cases, they might see the police and get much worse. So it really can go either way. The best thing that you can do is, if a crowd's starting to say, I've got this, this is where I work, or this is my son, I've got this. Oftentimes people say he has autism because people understand that better than PWS. So it's kind of easier to just say, he has autism, we're fine, he'll settle down. And if they do walk away, and hopefully they do, he'll settle down on his own. It might take an hour, but he'll settle down on his own. And unless he's in the middle of the street, all you can do is let it happen. It's just kind of give him a little bit of space. But the more because you're embarrassed, so you're saying, come on, let's go, I'll get you something. Or, if you don't get up right now, you're not going to go on the outing tomorrow. All those things are the worst possible things you could do. The best thing you can do is nothing. as long as he's not going after somebody in the community, and then you're going to have to hold him back.
Yeah, and I think that's really hard. I mentioned it a little bit in my presentation too, that embarrassment that we all feel.
Yes. Yep.
As parents, you feel shame, people
Yeah.
are, that sort of thing. It's
Yep.
tough.
Yeah.
Diane says that mittens can be easily removed. And then ask the name of the fingernail gel. I think it's A and C, but do you have tips for things that can be removed, like mittens? How do you?
Yeah.
What do you
Yeah.
do?
So one mom that we worked with recently, her son is still living at home, just put zip ties on them. On the bottoms. It wasn't tight, but tight enough that he couldn't slip them off. Another mom I knew used the hockey like goalie mitts,
Oh yeah.
and they had a strap on the bottom, and they were able to put a little lock on the strap to keep them on.
Yeah. How about picking at the nose? So
Yeah.
she wears gloves. She's supervised at all times.
Yep.
The plastic sensory popper, but it generally happens when they're in the bathroom.
Yes. Yeah. So we actually have someone who has a really dangerous nose picking behavior, because he's going to damage his septum. I mean, there's going to be permanent damage. He is someone that we use the handheld game for, and that stopped it, because really it's habit. It's a compulsion. Sometimes it's boredom. So if they're sitting on the toilet and they're there for 5 or 10 minutes, their finger's going to go right up their nose. So give them something the second they sit down. Like give them, and those games are like $20. Like they're not expensive. You don't have to buy like a Game Boy. You just get one of those. You go on Amazon. They're so inexpensive. Even if you have a few, to just rotate them. It keeps their hands busy while they're there, because it's just a compulsion. They're going to go right for it.
I would also be aware of how you're responding. So if it's somebody who really responds well to attention, and you're making a big deal out of what this looks like, you're inadvertently reinforcing that, so it's going to increase. Especially
if it's really messy.
Yes.
Because and you're going, oh my God, look, and there's blood everywhere and it's disgusting. It's so hard, but you just have to act like it's any other day, like you're just doing any other task. Because if you react, even negative attention is attention. You have to not do that. And it's so hard, especially when you're doing things like anything that has to do with rectal picking and, smearing, anything like that. It is so hard to act like it's not a big deal, but you have to.
Yep. What suggestions do you have for helping a DSP understand these types of things? Training, practicing, feedback. Some seem to get it, but others really seem to struggle to put it in place.
Yeah. So it really is a matter of just listening to things like this. Like you have to just do constant training, and it's hard because the staff that are coming in at so many different levels with so many different life experiences, that it really is a matter of just constant training. Even if you have to take an hour a week at a staff meeting, anything, just train, and let them hear it from different people. They're probably not going to listen to you, because that's how it is. You have to have people in from the outside. No one has any money right now. I get it. So just use what's online. You guys have a bunch of stuff on your website. There's so much information out there. I would just let other people say it and have them watch it, even if you have to do it every single week, so they get it. It's hard. That's one of the hardest parts about your job. I get that.
Yep, I agree. I also think that it's okay that some people are not meant to work with individuals with PWS.
100%. Yes, 100%. And pretty quickly. And I say that in orientation too. It's like, you're going to know in the first month if you have it or you don't. It's okay if you don't, but you got to go.
Do you recommend different strategies for individuals who have both PWS and autism?
It's pretty similar. The strategies that we use are pretty similar for both populations. The sensory input, the routines, the schedules, they're pretty similar. I haven't seen a big difference in need for someone with that dual diagnosis and someone with an individual diagnosis. The program is really the same. The needs are very, very similar. They're very similar. So I don't think you have to do anything different with a person with a dual diagnosis as opposed to someone with just the PWS diagnosis.
Can you explain confabulation? And how
Yeah,
is it?
yeah, yeah. What was the last part? How frequent is it?
How frequent? Yes.
It's
You
very
see.
frequent. But the severity changes. The severity is different from person to person. So here's the thing, regardless of what they're lying about, if it's something that doesn't matter, if they're saying I'm a fireman and I have 16 cats at home and I'm married and I have 4 kids, it doesn't matter. Like that, it doesn't matter throughout their day. It's not having any impact on what they're doing. I would just say that's a nice story and move on. But the problem comes when they're saying someone did something to them, or that they didn't eat, or that they have a medical diagnosis they don't have, anything like that. Find out why they're doing it. Something they're getting something out of this behavior, whether it's attention, whether it's getting someone in trouble, whatever it is. You have to find out what they're getting from it and remove that. So if they're saying staff hit me, or my dad pushed me down the stairs, and you know that didn't happen, you still have to address it. You still have to say, I know that's not true. Now, as professionals, we have to file. If we hear something like that, we're mandated reporters, we have no choice. But if this is something that's happening at home, here's the thing. A lot of times families don't see this as like a top priority behavior, but it is. And here's why. When they reach adulthood, if they have a history of making accusations against people that aren't true, they're going to be placed in a house with a higher staffing level. And the house with the higher staffing level is going to have people in it who have really severe behaviors.
Yes.
And you don't want them there. Like, that's not the house you want them in. That's not the place you want them in, especially if that's their only behavior. But that's where they're going to go because they need to protect your child and they need to protect all the people around him. So it is something that you want to address young, and you'll see it start pretty young. So if you see a little kid and they're telling these stories and they're telling them against other people, you want to try to shut that down as soon as you can and make sure that they're not getting extra attention for it, that, you know, they're not getting reinforced by this behavior, because it is a really serious behavior. Even though it doesn't quite seem like one, it's probably one of the biggest behaviors because it's going to have a huge impact on their adult life.
Can you talk just a little bit about the difference between the confabulation that's allegation related and the just elaborate storytelling?
Yeah. So the storytelling, I don't really think is a big deal. You know, we have a lot of people, there's a lot of people at PWS who do this, and they have all these great big stories. And it's really a matter of, it's a power struggle. Like, do you want to fight that battle? I don't. It doesn't matter. It doesn't affect their life. It doesn't affect my life. It's a story that they have, and that's fine. Where the line is drawn is when they start making allegations. And not everyone who has storytelling does that. In fact, most don't, but some do. And that's the part that needs to be addressed, is the allegations, not the confabulation, not the storytelling. That, I don't see that as even anything you need to address. Like, it's happening. Fine, do it. It's not hurting anybody. The allegations hurt people a lot. And that's the part that needs to be addressed. So they're two totally different things.
Thank you. Is it harmful or beneficial to allow twirling a string, or should you stop them from doing it?
No, I don't think so. So this comes up a lot. We have people who twirl. We have people who shred things like cloth, papers. It's a coping mechanism. It calms them down. I don't see anything wrong with it. Some people might say it's not socially acceptable, but it is. I mean, it's there. This is something that calms them down, that they use to feel safe and comfortable. I think it's totally fine. I don't think it needs to be stopped. And it's actually a nice coping mechanism that they found for themselves. It's not harmful. I think it's totally fine to do that. It's just stimming. It's fine.
Yes. Yep. And I think, sometimes we see people get a little worried about some of that shredding and the mess that it can make. I found it really helpful to give people a place where they can, and it doesn't matter if they.
Yep.
But I, in my experience, when you stop it and you shut it down, you introduce, or they bring back dangerous, or
they're going to find something else, and it's not. That's a completely calming, peaceful activity. I don't see anything wrong with it.
Barb says that she has her son put his head down on the table and cover his eyes when he's upset out in the community. This has helped him to cut out that stimulation and shut
That's
them.
nice. Good. Yes.
Example, Barb.
Yeah.
This is a great question. Wouldn't calling the police be reinforcing, given how many folks with PWS love the police and firefighters?
So it depends. Sometimes it is. So we try to avoid it at all costs because we have so many kids that love the police. Others see it as oh no, I better behave myself. So it really depends on the person. We try to avoid the police completely. But sometimes it's unavoidable. But yes, it depends on how they view them. So some view them as like they're the big boss, don't piss them off.
Right.
And others view them as they're my best friend, I want to spend all my time with them. So it really depends on the person. But we try to avoid police completely.
We always did as well. How do you address regurgitation?
Yeah, so this is a really good one. There's a couple of things that you can do. There is, Stacy, you might remember, it was back when we were at the first Orlando hotel. And it was someone who did a study on swallowing. It was like the grossest thing I've ever seen, but it's so interesting.
Yes.
So they have like a,
yes, yep.
They have like a pocket.
Clinical dysphagia where it stays there.
Yes. So part of it is their anatomy, that they're able to bring it up. And like, I couldn't do that, but they can. So there's a couple of things you can do. One, and this kind of goes against what we've always said, but one is exercising after they eat because it helps digestion speed up. So they can't bring the food up. The other thing that has been really helpful is one of those like exercise trampolines, not the big trampoline, but the one that you just hold on to and jump. That's super helpful because that kind of helps everything move and go, and it takes a lot of like stillness and concentration for them to do this. So if they're super busy after they eat, once it's down, they can't bring it back up.
Right.
It's when it's like in here. And the other thing that we've used, and I know that Janet's Agarwal uses this a lot too, is the sour spray.
Yes.
So if it's Warhead sour spray, you can get it anywhere. And if you give them a few squirts in their mouth, they don't want to lose the taste. So they won't bring the food up because they want to keep that sweet, sour taste in their mouth. So those are three things that can help.
Using the chase and pace method helps, where you're encouraged to take a sip after every bite to help bring things down.
Yeah, to help bring it down.
Push things through, but it can be effective. My daughter is 8 years old and she's never picked up skin. At what age do we usually see this happen?
She probably should have done it by now. I would think by now you'd see something. Now, that's not saying that if she has a surgery, an accident where she has like a scrape, a bug bite, that could start it. So if you do have something like that, I would just make sure it's like addressed immediately. Like if she has a scrape on her elbow, I would just keep that wrapped until it heals, because sometimes it starts when you introduce an opening in the skin.
I very often refer to you, you may not know this, or want me to, as the rectal picking expert. So this person is asking, what strategies do you suggest for rectal picking? Desperately trying to provide strategies to everyone for a young adult without taking away his dignity. Yes.
Okay. So a couple of things. Usually rectal picking starts when they're constipated and they're trying to get things going on their own. So I would have him on a really good bowel regimen, whatever the doctor recommends as far as keeping it going and smooth and never constipated. So that's one. The other, because it's not really a sexual act. It's more, it starts, and it's something that once they start a habit, it's really hard to get them to stop. But again, going back to barriers, I would make sure it's really hard to get back there. If he's on the bathroom, I'd keep his hands, both hands busy the whole time. Triathlon suits are amazing because it's so hard to get there. Tights are good, especially like during the day. At night, I would do the triathlon suit for sure. I would put something on his hands if this is really bad, because here's the problem. Over time, his rectum's going to prolapse. And if that keeps happening, he's going to end up with an ostomy bag. And that's that, talk about losing his dignity. So you want to get things in place now before something like that happens, and that will happen. That's a pretty expected end result of chronic rectal picking.
Yep. Are fidget toys really effective for anything? I haven't seen them make a difference.
Yeah, so it depends on the child, it depends on the person. But what I find helpful is for them to pick their own. So if you just kind of hand them a bunch of fidget toys, they may or may not use them. I think they're super effective. The kids at Latham have their own little sensory bags, and they use them all day long. Some kids just don't have, your child just might not have sensory processing disorder, tactile, like that might not help or hurt, right? It might just kind of be there. But for the most part, they are really helpful. I would have him or her pick it out themselves and see if maybe that helps at all.
I think this is a bit of a loaded question. Our struggles with providing a stress-free food environment for our adult daughter. The state requires, says food is a right, it's a mandate. So we're talking about the HCBS settings rule.
Yep.
Are others seeing that food is being treated as a right? It's being left out. People are getting access to being told that they can. They have keys and that sort of thing. Okay.
So it depends on the state. So in Massachusetts, we can lock the food. But Stace, you guys had issues in New York for a long time. So what did you do?
So we worked really closely with our state audit team, but we also partnered with CMS, who developed the settings rule. And what we learned from them is if you address food from a clinical medical reason rather than a behavioral reason.
And it is.
You don't have to put it in a behavior plan. You put it in their medical plan, just like you would for diabetic foods.
Okay.
And that made a huge difference for us. I talk with a lot of families and providers around the country like you do. It really comes down to how the state is interpreting the intention.
Yeah.
In July, we're actually doing a webinar presentation with CMS to help address this issue.
Oh, nice.
Language to providers to use so that hopefully we can get around this in the future.
Because it is a medical issue, so that makes sense to do that. But I know not all states go for that. And honestly, they're putting their lives at risk by not taking this seriously.
And they really don't understand PWS.
Yeah.
And then it appears from their perspective, when we have it in a behavior plan, that we're saying they have
restricting something that's a basic human right. That makes sense.
When my now 27-year-old was still in the crib, I added a paperback book novel. She used that until she was 23, and then we had a major medical issue when she couldn't, a flip book. Oh, are you reading Harry Potter? Sherry, I am not sure what you're referring to here. If you can provide a little more clarification, that would be helpful. So another question more about the therapy and the professionals. What is a neuropsychologist, and are they helpful?
I'm not sure I can best answer that. Stace, can you give an answer to that?
So neuropsychologists often do assessments around anything that affects the central nervous system, a lot of educational assessments. I have found using a neuropsychologist when you're looking at eligibility things or getting the right IEP in place, it's often used as that independent educational evaluation. A neuropsychologist may do that. For those of you who know Dr. Jan Forrester or have seen her present, she's a neuropsychiatrist, actually.
Yeah.
So I think it can be helpful. It's hard to find a good neuropsychologist or psychiatrist who knows PWS.
Yeah.
I think that's the case for most specialties anyway, is helping somebody understand PWS and addressing it from that perspective.
Yeah.
How do you work with anxiety and incontinence? A 22-year-old daughter, when she's anxious, she'll often not be able to go to the bathroom, but then later she'll wet herself. Yeah.
So a couple of things about that. One is that, we know when we have to pee well before we have to go. Yes. I mean, 20 minutes, half hour, well before. People with PWS get the signal that they have to pee right before they have to pee, which is why we have so many issues with overnight incontinence. So when she's super anxious, it may just be a matter of her brain tells her right before she has to go, but she's not listening to that signal, that even though that signal's super late, she's not listening. Usually she can get to the bathroom in time. If she's anxious, she's not hearing that signal and she's just going to go. Now, it really depends on how often it happens, but there's really no reason not to use something like Depends if she's willing to do it. And if it's something that happens regularly, if it happens infrequently and you can kind of know when it's going to happen, that's different. But if this is happening every day or even a few times a week, I would give her a poise pad or something to help her out, because that's she doesn't want to do that, and she's feeling pretty bad about herself after it happens, I'm guessing.
Yes. I know that there's a lot of questions, but we are out of time. Would you be comfortable with me sending you these questions and you could answer them in a document?
100%. Yep, absolutely.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you all for being here today. Patrice, thank you. This was
of course, it was great.
20 years later, I'm still learning things from you. So, so appreciative of your expertise and sharing that with all of us.